Gotcha. Um, and so how did your family end up in the camps then?
Well, when the war was, complete, right? And we use complete in quotation marks. When the Khmer Rouge army took over the capital, which is Phnom Penh in Cambodia, and forced the current government and the monarchy out, the next thing they did was they pushed all of the Cambodian people that lived in these cities into the jungles, right? So the idea was that this city is not meant for us. The city was built by Westerners. The cities did not represent his Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge, did not represent his ideas of what this communist utopia is going to be, right? So he forced all these city people into the jungles. People were forced to live in these jungles, and then they started creating these concentration camps where they were forced laboring type of environments where people were forced to work for the Khmer Rouge army. People were tortured, massacred. I mean, there was just graves all over the place. And then they also had forced marriages. They wanted to create this perfect this perfect Cambodian person, right? So they would identify certain people to marry based on look, based on height, based on skin tone. They also started killing people that did not represent their communist way of life, right? So if you were an artist, if you were a former politician, if you were an educator, right, they started killing these people right away. If you were associated with the military or you were a military person, they killed you right away. And then afterwards, they just started killing people because they felt you're not doing what you're supposed to do, or you're speaking out, or you didn't look the way they wanted you to look, right? Or you followed a religion that they didn't respect, that they didn't want, that didn't represent their ideas and things like that.
Wow. And so your family ended up in one of these camps, and so you said you were there for 2 years living in there?
Yep. So we were in a camp. It's a little bit outside this city called Bat Tabong. Which is, I don't know how far that is from the border of Thailand, but obviously it took a few days for my family to walk to Thailand. So that's kind of how far it was. But we were in that concentration camp, which I found out that a lot of the Cambodians that are on that end up on the East Coast was actually that they were also in that concentration camp towards Bat Tabong. That area is somewhat famous, and not famous for the right reasons. It's because they had this basically torture camp that was next to the concentration camp. Basically, it was an area that used to be a school, and they changed the school to torture people and interrogate people and things like that. My father was actually, I believe, housed in that, or he was housed in a place close to that building.
Did you go back? Have you ever gone back to see this camp?
No, I have not. My mother has been back, and she actually took pictures of it and walked it and things like that. My siblings, they've been able to do the same thing. I've never had a chance to. I mean, there was plans of doing so, and then life happens.
Yeah, no. And so I remember you told me before that your father was actually being tortured. And it was that what caused your mother to decide, we need to get out of here before something happens to her and her children?
Well, there was always plans of trying to escape. It's just trying to find the right time, right?
Okay.
I think when my father was still with us, there was plans of escaping, but it was just never the right time. Obviously, when my father was executed, it kind of accelerated those plans. But what made it possible was this was towards the end of the Vietnam War, and Vietnam was actually coming into Cambodia to also deal with the Communist Party. Right? Because they didn't want this war to basically flood into their country. Right, so they started coming into the country, and Thailand started coming into the country, and also there was influx of different type of military presence from the French or from America, so their army started deteriorating. So the Khmer Rouge army started deteriorating, and they started fighting amongst each other for power, for position. There was a lot of insecurity in regards to their leadership, so they started killing each other off also. So we escaped because there was an opportunity where there was less security that
Gotcha.
was present at this concentration camp.
And so when your family, it was you, your mother, who else?
So it was me, my mother, my older sister that we adopted. So we
Okay.
adopted her in the concentration camp because there was a lot of children that did not have parents. So it's not uncommon to meet Cambodians that have relatives that they adopted coming to America, right? So we also have an uncle that we actually adopted also. So we escaped with other families that was also in the same position and was ready to escape with us. And many of those people are still with us in regards to we know where they live. We are very close with them. I consider them like real family. But also there were several people that were killed that perished on the journey to Thailand. Right. My mother told me there was a group of people that stepped on a landmine and exploded, right in front of them. There were people that got really sick on the way to Thailand, and they end up having to leave them. I mean, also I got really sick to the point where I was no longer responsive, and I became very pale, and people were concerned that I was either on my way to dying or I was already dead. Right. So there were multiple conversations with my mother to basically leave me in the jungle or bury me there, because she was carrying this child that was already dying or is dead, and causing issues because when I was awake, I would just constantly cry. Right. So they were afraid that the Khmer Rouge army would find us if I continued to cry like that.
Wow. Mother's love, man. She'd never leave you behind,
Yeah.
right? That's beautiful.
I was her last, I was her, I was the last person that connected her to my father. Right.
Wow.
Because my older brother also was in the concentration camp and died of starvation and illness.
Okay.
So she said that even if I was dead, she wanted to control that. She wanted to make sure at least she got me to the refugee camp, right? And then she can make the decision how to proceed.
Wow. And wow, so that's incredible, man. Thanks for sharing that. And when you guys did arrive, what was the situation? I mean, were there challenges there? Did they have camps set up for you guys and supplies and
Yeah, the refugee camp, I think it's no different than the images that we see of refugee camps now, right? Often these refugee camps are lawless place. I mean, it's not a pretty place to live in. You have makeshift tents. The bathroom is basically the jungle. The water is the little streams that flow through the camps. There's malaria. There's other diseases happening. There's people taking advantage of other people. There's human trafficking. There's all these things that existed that my mom talked about, where all of a sudden women disappear, in the middle of the night, or the kids disappear in the middle of the night. So she told me all these image, all these stories that happen in the refugee camp, and also the Thai security did not treat us well, right? Because we were foreigners, we were a burden on in their budget, in their government and things like that. But my mother did find a person that became my stepfather, and then my younger sister was born in the refugee camp. So I was born in a concentration camp. My sister was born in a refugee camp, and kind of like our family grew. So now we have myself, my sister, my stepfather, my mother, the uncle we adopted, and my older sister that we adopted. And because of that, now that we have this tight family, and my uncle spoke English, which helped a lot. We were able to get sponsored to come to America. So after about a year and a half, close to 2 years, we ended up getting sponsored to come to America.
That's awesome. And how did you guys feel? I mean, I guess, how did your mother and father feel at that time then? Your stepfather?
Oh, they were excited. I think from what I was told, there was a few options. They had an option to get sponsored somewhere in Europe. right? So there's two
Mhm.
options. We could have been in like Norway or Switzerland.
Okay.
There was an elderly woman that kind of lost all of her children in the war.
Mhm.
I think but she was pretty wealthy, right? But she had family like in Switzerland, and she wanted us to go with her, because we kind of took care of her. My mother and stepfather took care of her, and she kind of took care of me, from what I was told. So she didn't want to leave me. But we decided to come to America because we just heard that there was more opportunities. And then we had other family members that we kind of took in
Mhm.
through, because of the travel that we went through from one concentration camp to the refugee camp. We knew that they were going to America, so we felt that it was a better option for all of us to go together.
And that, usually like that's kind of the narrative we have, the refugee, the immigrant family comes to America and their life gets magically better, right? So, and that was your hope too, right? I mean, that's what
Yeah.
you guys were hoping. We're saved, we're going to go to America, life's good, all of this is behind us, our life is going to be better. But what happened when you did arrive then?
Well,
Like,
when people arrived, like there was an internment camp. So, not at the level of the concentration camp that was in Cambodia, or the refugee camp that was in Thailand, but there was an internment camp that they kind of created, in California, for new arrivals. And we were placed not necessarily in the internment camp, but we had like a holding place in Long Beach,
hmm,
and then we ended up in New York.
okay.
Um, and a lot of it's because of resources, right? We were sponsored by Catholic charities. There were several families in Syracuse and New York City that adopted us. So when we came to New York, it's because this is where the resources were. This is, actually the families that we came together, that came with us to America, we also got split because they had different sponsors. So we originally ended up in Syracuse, but not for long, and then we ended up in Brooklyn. They were already in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And that's how we ended up in Brooklyn, in the 80s.
Okay. Wow. And so what was that experience like? I mean, was it easy to assimilate into the community? Were there challenges? How did you guys adapt to that new life?
Yeah, there was lots of challenges, right? So, Brooklyn in the 80s was extremely tough. We lived in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. This is not the hipster Brooklyn that we see, today. No one wanted to move from Manhattan to Brooklyn, right? um, Brooklyn, Sunset Park, Brooklyn on 61st Street was a very difficult environment. It was during the crack epidemic. It was not uncommon to see someone OD in the alleyway. It was also heroin was a big issue. The 80s, heroin and crack. There's a lot of gang warfare. 'Cause you hear gunshots at the night. The Bronx had their issues about the Bronx were being burnt down also in this period. Um, and each borough kind of had their different gang related issues. So you don't want to leave your borough and end up in another borough, and get caught out there. And then, so as a Cambodian family, we were kind of basically boxed into this little neighborhood, and the
Mhm.
neighborhood was predominantly like Dominicans, Haitians, and Puerto Ricans. And I remember like no one got along, right? Everyone kind of stuck to their own ethnic group.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, but
So,
I mean that. So in regards to making ends meet, right? Living in Brooklyn, often my mother, my which is my great uncle. I mean, they would work 3 or 4 jobs. They would have 2 main jobs, and they would work under the table, sewing things, selling things. Just basically producing things that was needed at corner stores, at textile type of businesses. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so there was a lot of that. So, and then also you had a language barrier. You had people, they were not familiar of where things were located. People try to take advantage of them because of the language barrier. So there was a lot of issues, a lot of problems.
Man, so you said your family stuck together. I mean, were there other Cambodian families you could lean on? You had, the support of while you were there?
Yeah, my which is my great uncle, and his family were in Brooklyn first, right?
Okay.
So we actually went there to be with them.
Uh-huh.
and there were other people that we didn't know that kind of took us in and helped us out and brought me to school and things like that. And look, everyone kind of looked after each other. So if
That's
one
right.
family member is working, there's always someone home to watch the kids, right?
That's
Things like
nice.
that. Yeah.
So did I have a friend out here in California. He told me like their community also came here to California as refugees. And what happened is in order to protect themselves, they formed gangs. And so did you witness that happening in New York as well? Or was it a different situation for you guys?
Yeah, some of the people that I grew up with, because I eventually left Brooklyn, many of them did join gangs, and some had died. Some of them got incarcerated, right? So the reason why we ended up in Syracuse, New York, is
Mm-hmm.
because when I was a kid during a block party, a fight broke out, right? And during that fight, a gun was pulled out, and I got shot just walking in the crossfire, right? And 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 that was like something that was common, right? So my mother eventually said, you know what, we have to find a different option, and uh,
Yeah.
we had sponsors back in Syracuse, so we decided to move to Syracuse.
Wow. And how was that? I mean, was that another cultural change? Were there other, I mean, New York City is easy to get around. I mean, Syracuse, I don't know if the public transportation is developed. Like, how was that, how easy was it to adapt to life in upstate New York?
Well, you're moving from a poor disenfranchised community to another poor disenfranchised community, right? So it's not like we moved from Brooklyn with money, right? We didn't move from Brooklyn with additional means, right? No, so we went from living in Section 8 housing in Brooklyn to living in Section 8 housing in Syracuse. Like you said, it's more, it's more spread out, right?
Yeah.
You just can't get on a train. You had to depend on buses that didn't run frequently, and it was somewhat more confusing. At least on a train, someone that don't speak English, you can point out to them, say, take the orange line, the red line. You get off when you see orange colors, things like that, right?
Yeah.
When you take a bus, you have to learn how to read,
Yeah.
right? And that becomes very difficult. And then you don't have that many options. So if you don't have a car, either you're walking or you're taking a bus, right? Yeah. So we dealt with different type of problems. We dealt with discrimination. We dealt with racism, right? We dealt with all type of prejudice and people taking advantage of us. I mean, we lived in a basement apartment that was not really an apartment for many years. Looking back, we thought it was cool that there was an area where the floor was dirt, right? We thought that was the coolest thing, not knowing it was dirt, because that was not a real apartment, right? That was a basement for the rest of the apartment complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Wow. Wow. And so like, how easy, I mean, it seems like it's really difficult. Like how does an immigrant and a refugee like community get out of that situation? I mean, did you know any families that were able to kind of climb their way out of that, or do they get stuck there? What happened?
Like, obviously people get stuck there, but a lot of people do make it, right? So it's based on determination, it's based on resilience, it's based on a lot of factors. I see a lot of families that were successful, it's by way of education, right? And then also they persevered by supporting each other. So it's not uncommon to have to see an Asian family, 6 or 7 families all live in one house, right? So by living in one house, they were able to save this money, not pay for babysitters, right? Everyone go half on the mortgage, go half on the utilities. Everyone do their share to maintain this place. But by doing that, they're all saving money, right? They're saving tons of money. They also growing a community to make sure that their kids are safe, that that their wife and husbands are taken care of and things like that. They look out after each other in regards to, I just found work here. I'm going to put in a good word for you to also work at this place, right?
Nice.
To eventually they save enough money, they get a better job, and then they end up moving from each other and then buying a place of their own, and that's how they're able to get out. Sometimes it's through their kids, right? So their kids were guarded from all these things. And even though they struggled and they lived in a poor environment, their parents worked 3 or 4 jobs so their children can focus on education. Often these, as an Asian immigrant refugee kid, the being disciplined means being abused, right? So there's also a different structure, different dynamics, and because of that, you didn't really go outside a lot. You didn't get involved in a lot of things outside of your household. You sometimes didn't make friends outside of the little community that your family created. And by doing so, sometimes that actually helped people to restrain from getting involved in these things, and they focus on education. And through that, they go off to college, they get a better job, and they take their family with them. Right? There's a pressure. There's an added pressure and responsibility for the older son or the older daughter to take care of the parents. So once you are in a better position, once you graduate college and you get that job, it's not uncommon for you to actually buy a house and then bring in your parents, right? And that's how you get them out.
Yeah, it's funny, I mean, my father's an immigrant too, and that's how I was raised as well. Definitely like the discipline, we're going to sacrifice, work hard so that you can get educated and do well, better than we did. And then we hope you'll take care of us when we get older. Right. And and that's how you get out of these situations. You're absolutely right. You can't do it by yourself. I mean, some people may, but the vast majority, you need to help each other. And one person needs to be sacrificing the other so that later on, that person can sacrifice for them, and it's beautiful that, it happens. It's some of the stuff that surrounds it is kind of sad. Like you said, the abuse and this and that, but yeah, I mean, it was better than dying in a camp in Cambodia. Right. I mean, you try to look at the positive. You're talking about like how hard these families work. There's a lot of talk now about how immigrants are taking resources from the broader society. And, we had a conversation before where you're saying even within like these economically depressed areas, one group sees another group as taking their resources, right? So, I mean, explains the tension between African-American society and, the Mexican community, and then the new immigrants who come after them, right? We were having that whole conversation, but, is there any reality to that? I mean, are these immigrants, is there a net positive from these communities, like working so hard, sacrificing, or is there a net negative? Are they taking from society? Have you come across any kind of information on that?
Well, through studies that have to do with economic development, when it comes to migration, when it comes to refugee and resettlement and things like that, it's pretty clear, right? Often when it comes to migration, those people that migrated to a certain community, to a certain city, help to increase economic development, right? There are jobs out there where the average American does not want to do, right? For whatever reason. It could be because they feel that it doesn't pay enough, right? They feel that it's underneath them, right? They got a certain amount of education. They feel that they are, that they should have a better job, right? It might be dangerous, right? So it's just not something they want to do. Well, as an immigrant and as a refugee that have faced genocide, where it's like, this is the only option for you, right? And you're looking at it and you're saying, it's better than what I came from, right? Often immigrants and refugees are willing to do those jobs that no one else wants to do initially, right? And because of that, at the same time, they get taken advantage of, right? So when we talk about, immigrants and refugees coming here to take American jobs, right? That is the history of America, right? Right? I mean, that's how America was built, right? I mean, the crazy thing is, like, imagine you saying that, oh, these slaves came in, all of these African-American slaves came in and they took the jobs, of the Europeans. They took the jobs of these Southerners. They didn't want to pick no damn cotton. Right. If they did, then there wouldn't be slavery. Right. It's always taking advantage of the next group of people. Right. So when it comes to resettlement, when it comes to migration, when it comes to all of these refugee policies, right? A lot of it, obviously there are people that do it out of the kindness of their heart. So I'm not taking away from that,
Mhm.
right? But when it comes to government, it's done because of economic development,
Yep.
right? At the end of the day, right? Chinatown is an example of that, right? You go to San Francisco, you go to New York City, you go to Atlanta, you go to Chicago, you see these, Philadelphia, you see Chinatown, and you see businesses everywhere. You see restaurants, you see stores, right?
Yep.
All of these are examples of entrepreneurship endeavors and ventures that were created by immigrants and refugees, right?
Yep.
They didn't come here, to start that. They came
Yep.
in and they put in work, it saved them money, and got skilled, or they had that skill, but they saved that money, and that's how it started. And it's no different than seeing, little Haiti, little Havana out in Miami, right? The Cubans did it, the Mexicans did it, the Haitians did it, the Italians did it. I mean, you see little Italy everywhere, right? So
Yep.
it's just that as a society, it depends on who's ever in power. Whether it's a Democrats, whether it's Republican, whether it's conservative, whether it's liberal, right? That these images change,
Mm.
right? They use it to fuel their political agendas versus telling
Mhm.
the truth and facts, right?
Yep. No, you're absolutely right, man. And it's so funny. I just remembered, like, my wife and I were watching some sort of, I can't remember if it was a cooking show or some sort of documentary, and they were talking about the phenomena of the donut shops here in Southern California. And do you know that story? Are you familiar
Yeah.
with?
Yeah, there's a documentary. Actually, you would love it. It's called Donut King. It's a documentary, and it's about this Cambodian guy who came to America, learned how to basically be involved in the donut business, saved
Mhm.
his money, started a franchise, and
Yep.
became so successful. He
Yep.
he actually helped other people to
Yeah.
start franchises, and that's why at one point, I don't know if it's still the same. At one point, almost every donut shop in California was owned by a Cambodian family, and they were so strong. Dunkin'
Yeah.
Donuts couldn't compete against them. Like Dunkin' Donuts came to California and was like, "Nah, we can't," and then moved out. You know
And
how powerful they
it's
were.
true. Like, my wife, like, we grew up in the East Coast, so like Dunkin' Donuts everywhere, right? And then we came out here, like, we can't find Dunkin' Donuts. There's no Dunkin' Donuts. But we find these like little mom and pop shops, and they're like, the donuts are so incredibly good. They're so reasonably priced. And then on top of it, like, there's always an Asian owner. And we're like, they're not Chinese. We couldn't figure it out. Like, where are they from? And then when we saw this documentary, I was like, oh my God, that's what happened. That's why they're all like these Asian owned donut shops here. And that's a prime example of how like Cambodian community has added to the value of the society, right? I mean, inexpensive, delicious donuts you just can't find, right? I mean, now I can't eat Dunkin' Donuts anymore. I honestly can't eat Dunkin' Donuts now. It's like, it's just garbage. So yeah, it was, I think Pick shared the link to that. So if anybody's interested in seeing the film, you can find it there.
You know, you know
Thank
what's interesting is being
you.
on the East Coast. I didn't have that history. I didn't have that context, right?
Ah,
I
yeah.
didn't know that there was this, empire, this Cambodian donut empire that was happening on the West Coast. So a funny story was I was doing a documentary myself,
Mhm.
and I was searching the web, and I found these video clips, and it
Mhm.
always ended like every single video clip. It ended with Cambodians finding a box of donuts, and they would go crazy, right? It was like random. And I didn't get the joke. I didn't get the context. So I was thinking, like, is this a racist thing? Like, are they being racist? Like, what is this, right?
Oh,
So I reached out to the guy that actually filmed these like mini films, basically these like
mhm.
these short type of like improvs that he was doing. So I
Okay.
reached out to him. His name is Bully Shot. He's located in Oakland, California. So I reached out to him and we spoke over the phone. He was like, "Where you located?" And I was like, "New York." He's like, he goes, "You guys don't have Cambodian donut shops there?" I was like, "Nah." He's like, "Yo, there's like a Cambodian donut shop in every corner. It's like bodegas in New York City. It's like every single corner." And he's like, it's like 6 degrees of separation. Like every family that has someone in the donut business. Um, And that's how I actually learned about this history of
Yeah.
Cambodians and donut shops.
It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. And it's awesome. I mean, I love it. Honestly, now, Dunkin' Donuts is starting to move in, and I'm very much against it. Like, no, leave the Cambodian people alone.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
love
yeah.
their donuts.
You know what? It's like every type of immigrant and refugee business, right? The parents start this business,
Yeah.
and the children get older, they go off to college, and they don't want to be part of that business.
No.
So yeah, so a
I
lot of
know.
these
Yeah,
businesses,
what happens to these businesses? Like, I know when they age out, right? They retire. I'm gonna miss my Cambodian donut shops, man. We
yeah,
need to bring.
so yeah,
You know,
so unless they sell the franchise
well, I hope they do.
to another Cambodian family, like sell the business to another Cambodian family, it
Yeah.
often just basically they retire, and it's the end of this hit legacy.
It's a shame. It's a shame. I mean, I watched Bourdain once. The same thing was happening, I think, in Singapore. A lot of the recent immigrants used to create these food stalls with really incredible food, affordable. And, they did this to provide for the next generation so that they could get educated, become doctors and lawyers and engineers. And that's what happened. But then what's happening now is those people are retiring, they're getting old, and, nobody's there to continue the business, and they're dying out. And so a part of the cultural fabric is disappearing for a good reason. The community has moved out of that. But yeah, I mean, you lose a bit of the culture that's been created because of them. And you kind of miss that. You realize, wow, these immigrants added something to the fabric of our society. They added value to us. And it's a really beautiful thing,
Yeah.
But, you shared a lot of really difficult situations you've had, like whether it was, being born into the concentration camp, going to the refugee camps in Thailand and surviving that, coming to America only to find, be dropped in the middle of a drug epidemic, right? And abuse and poverty and how did you get beyond that? You got a great education. You're, like you said, an educational executive, right? Higher education executive. You are a mentor, a businessman. How did you not let your circumstances, affect you?
It's funny, right? So, I wrote a book a few years ago reflecting on these things, right? And 50% of it's luck,
Yeah.
right? That's why I'm a big believer in Malcolm Gladwell's outlier. I just
Yeah.
happen to be at the right place at the right time, or I happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Right, so it's like 50% luck, or if you are a Muslim, it's the qadar of Allah, right? It's like meant to be, right? It made you stronger, right? If you survived it, it made you stronger. So so going back, adding to this story, my stepfather is very abusive, or was very abusive, right? To the point where he threatened to kill me when I was, I think, about 12 or 13. And he also had mental illness, so he would say a lot of crazy things, but I knew he would act on these things, right?
Wow.
So one day he lost his job, he got fired, he came home, went to my room, took my clothes, took my bed sheets, went to the backyard and set them on fire.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he told me that he lost his job because I was bad luck and that he was going to have to kill me.
Whoa,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Holy.
So as a kid, I packed up my clothes, packed my book bag. I had like $40, I remember, and I ran away. So for 2 weeks, I was homeless, just wandering the streets, going to school to eat, falling asleep in class, things like that. Trying to find like rec programs so I can try to sleep under a bench. There was a church. There's a church here in Syracuse off of James Street that had this like really big bush in front of us, and it still does. It's still there, and a lot of people don't know about this, but you can actually go behind that bush, and you create like a little fort, right? And I create a little fort back there. I would fall asleep. I would wander the streets until it's daytime, and I did that for about 2 weeks until my older sister, the one that we adopted, she took me in.
Wow. Okay.
So she took me in. I lived with them for about 2 years.
Wow.
And then eventually moved back with my mother and my stepfather, and the abuse continued. But I was old enough. By this time, I was 14. and I
Okay.
fought back. I fought back, and I ended up beating him really badly.
Wow. Wow.
And the police got involved, and he was taken away, and we haven't seen him since. Right?
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes. So you have these, all these events that happen, and right away, we as a kid, I celebrated, this idea that he's gone. He's no longer there to harm me, my siblings, and my mother anymore. But reality starts sinking in because he was also the breadwinner of the family,
Mm,
right? So after a few months of him being away, bills started piling up, right?
mm,
An eviction notice came in the mail, those type of things. And I ended up, doing things I am not proud of. Right, I got involved in selling dope. I sold crack for a moment with a few friends. I sold weed. Right. I also worked, like 2 or 3 jobs while going to school. And then eventually I met an amazing person by the name of Willie Dardell, who kind of took me in almost like his son. Right, I consider him like a father figure right now. African American, very well respected in the community. He saw something in me. He saw this kid that was struggling in school, that was getting into trouble. And he said he saw something in himself in me, right? He saw the anger, but he saw potential in me.
wow.
Right? And he
Wow.
was one of those guys that, once he adopted you, he's not going to let you go.
Beautiful.
Right. So by him taking me under his wing, I started shaping up, right?
Wow.
I stopped doing a lot of these things I was doing. My mother got a better job. I started, focusing more on my school,
Hmm.
and eventually graduated high school. And
Nice.
he's the one who pushed me into community college. And it was in community college that I discovered I was dyslexic, right? So
Wow.
there's another turning point, right? So all throughout public education, I was placed in I was placed in special education. I was placed in what they call resource room. I had all these after school programs I need to be involved
Yeah.
in. I was always like 2 years behind everybody, right?
And you never identified the dyslexia then, huh?
No, they just said I had a learning disability. They just didn't
Oh,
explain what that is. Um, I graduated high school not with a Regents diploma, right? I graduated through it's like a career diploma basically. It's
okay.
a vocational program. So I was in high school taking a vocational program to graduate. And I don't think I would have graduated if it wasn't for that vocational program, right? But so here's the
Mhm.
funny story was, I was in community college for 4 years, right? So community college is 2 years. I was there for like 4 years trying to get a bachelor's out of a 2 year school, right? And I had been placed on academic probation. Right, I
Wow.
lost my EOP scholarship because I was failing, and I was working 2 jobs at the time. I was like a security job, and I was working in a nursing home at the same time, going to school full time. And
Wow.
I was in this early morning class. It's like 7 a.m. after I did a midnight shift,
Wow.
and I had to go to this human service class taught by Mr. Eppolito, right? No, I'm like Mr. Nicholas Poulos. Nicholas Poulos, right?
Okay.
Now, when we talk about life changing, this was another turning point because in Nicholas Poulos' class, I fell asleep, right? Because I had just worked the midnight shift, and I was sleeping very hard to the point I was snoring very hard in his class, right? Right, and I was not aware that I did all this stuff, and I was drooling all over the place, and 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 here's a guy that could have easily got really angry and kicked me out of his class and woke me up and embarrassed me. He told the class that to leave me alone and let me sleep because he knew that I worked a double shift and I had this hard life, and he was just
Wow.
happy to see me there. That just showed that I was determined. So when
Yep.
I found out he said this, I went looking for him to apologize, and he told me not to apologize. He just asked me to do a favor, and that favor was to take a series of tests. He
Mm.
was concerned that my writing looked off. He was looking at my notes. He looked at my homework. He was like, "Your writing is a little off. I just want to do a few tests just to see if I can provide additional resource for you." I did this test. It turned into more tests. It turned into interviews. It turned into more tests. And then eventually that's how I was diagnosed. They figured out I was dyslexic, right? But here's the amazing thing. So, you know, once you've been identified or diagnosed with dyslexia, that could have ended there, right? It could be like, oh, it's another stigma I have to deal with, right? Another label someone's going to put on me. It's just going to be more. It's just going to be harder for me going forward. And he actually told me this was good news, right? I was like, how is this good news? You just told me I'm dyslexic, right? And he goes, it's good news because you could learn. You just learn different.
How to work around it.
Yeah, and now that we know you learn different, we can make sure we put in the resources and make sure you're in the right environment. And that actually changed everything for me because I realized I love learning. I just didn't know how
to learn like everybody else, right? And that's an incredible teacher who did that. You know, I mean, like, you know, what upsets me too is like, you know, how could you have gotten through all of high school or even, you know, middle school without having this diagnosis? I mean, that to me is very upsetting, you know, just getting labeled like, oh, this guy's like a troublemaker, just not a good learner. He's, you know, not smart. Like that's, you know, I mean, it's a different time, of course. Right. And I hope now we have those, you know, the resources to identify this. Do you know, like, have things changed?
Yeah. Some schools are better at it. Right. Some schools have special resource programs, you know, additional, what do they call, like different applied learning models and more kinesthetic curriculum. But not all schools have that resource.
Yeah. Right? It's gonna cost money, right?
Yeah. So sometimes students that are dyslexic are still at a very, you know, big disadvantage and are placed in special education programs with everybody else that is struggling with different needs.
Yep. Yeah. It's not specific to, you know, what they need. You're right. Absolutely right. So yeah, how did you overcome this then? Like, so what, you know, what was next then? Like, yeah, you need to learn differently. Where'd you guys go from there?
So I worked one-on-one with him. Even on classes that I didn't have with him, I would go to his office. He would provide me with additional resources. I was able to record lectures and listen to it later, those type of things. Until eventually he told me that he felt like maybe OCC, Onondaga Community College, was not right for me. But he knew a college that really worked one-on-one with adults, right? People that worked full-time, people that needed more mentoring, those type of things. So I raised my GPA to like a 2.6, 2.7, something like that, and was able to transfer to SUNY Empire State College, a state school that was created before the online revolution, right? So before everything was online, they did distance learning, you know, where you met one-on-one with somebody. You know, sometimes you met with a person at a coffee shop, right? Sometimes at a military base, sometimes at a library. But they had these professors, you know, these are people with PhDs, but they work with you one-on-one, or they work in a small cohort setting.
Okay.
And, you know, and sometimes your assignments were mailed to you. You had videotapes, you had cassettes. So everything was already set for you.
Yeah.
And that actually helped me accelerate. So I went from struggling in class, you know, losing my EOP scholarship and being placed on academic probation to, you know, quickly going to a 3.0 to a 4.0, you know, and accelerating and actually really enjoying this process.
Incredible, man. That's incredible. So that really changed your life then. I mean, yeah, you realized you did love education, and it was just really this, you know, one little, you know, diagnosis, dyslexia, that changed that. And a professor who really cared, like you said, that luck aspect. Like, what if he wasn't around, your life might have taken a very different.
That's exactly it, right? That's exactly it. That to me is another example of like sheer luck, being at the right place at the right time, or it's the will of God, right?
Yeah.
If I went to a different college, if I went to a different school, you know, my life would be very different.
Yeah. Wow. So like you talk about, you know, and then the determination, right? I came across one of your old, like you did, what was it? Like I said, like a documentary, right?
Yeah.
And I saw an interview, and you were talking about a conversation you had with that African-American guy who helped you out, right? Yeah. I think he also set you straight. I think for me, like how important was he in this story as well?
Oh, he's very important. He's still a part of my life. Yes. So the situation, the turning point and I talk about this in my book and the documentary, was there was a race riot that happened at my high school between the Puerto Ricans and the black kids, right?
Okay.
And they were afraid that this would spill over to, into more fights and someone getting really hurt. Someone actually got stabbed.
Wow.
So they were afraid that this was like a war between the Latin kings and a black gang in the school and things like that. So they brought this group of mediators into the school to do conflict resolution. So they separated the black kids from the Puerto Rican kids to do this mediation, and they didn't know my ethnicity, right? So they had no idea. They're like, this guy could be Puerto Rican, it could be black, we don't know, right? But we know he's involved in the in this situation somehow, right? So I came into school, and I remember I got pulled into the office, and everyone's looking at this list of names to figure out where they're supposed to go. And I was like, what list am I going to be on, right? and so this is the funny piece, right? We talk about we talked about diversity training and things like that. Is my name was actually on both lists. So I was like, so they decided. They're like, well, we're gonna put them both in the list of Puerto Ricans and the list of black kids at the same time, right? Right. So, so it was, I didn't, funny thing is I didn't think about it. I was like, okay, whatever, right? And I was friends. Like I knew both groups. Like I was very close with both groups. I'm still close with a lot of those guys I went to school with.
Okay.
So when I walked in with the mediation group that the black kids were involved in, no one was like, hey, he doesn't belong here. I was like, hey, I just came right in. And the same thing with the Puerto Ricans. I was like, hey, come on in. Right. But the funny thing was I got a chance to hear both sides of the story that no one else did. Right.
So cool.
And I actually helped mediate.
I was gonna say, like, you're the natural mediator. Right? They should have hired you.
Yeah, because they were allowed to share their experience and vent their frustration in this space, but the space was still isolated within their ethnic group. So the other group didn't hear what was happening. They didn't, and come to find out, it was over a girl. Like a fight happened over a girl, and then because it looked like this black kid against this Puerto Rican kid and a few other Puerto Rican kids that were related, right? Like this is not a gang thing; they were family. They jumped in, and then a group of black kids saw what was happening, so they thought it was a bunch of Puerto Rican kids taking advantage of this black kid. So they jumped in, and that escalated, right? So I was able to go back and forth between this group and kind of smooth things out. Was like, yo, did you realize you guys fighting over a girl? Like it's not that big of a deal, right? and help to de-escalate it.
Wow.
But but Willie Dardell was in one of the mediation group.
Okay.
And he was asking various questions, and one of the questions he had was, when do drug dealers make the most money? Right. So he asked this very serious question because, we're talking about drug dealing. We're talking about the community. We're talking about all this illegal activity that was happening in various neighborhoods. And he just asked this question that was a part of a larger conversation. Right. Mm-hmm. So when he asked that question, I thought it was funny. I took it as a joke.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
First off, I know the answer, because I was involved in some shady stuff, right? but to age myself, this is also the same time Bone Thugs and Harmony had put out the song Month, right?
Yeah.
So I actually sang it. I was like, I know the answer. It's the first of the month. Wake up, get up. It's the first of the month. So I started singing it. And everyone starts laughing except Mr. Dardell. Like he was livid.
I'm sure he was. It's like,
he was pissed. Right? And he scolded me. He was like, how dare you? Like,
Wow.
how dare you laugh at this,
Yeah.
right? And I've never been scolded by a man that I respected, right?
Yeah.
I've been scolded by teachers, I've been scolded by officers, and but this was a guy that I respect. This was a guy I saw as a father figure. So when he scolded me, I shut up like right away. Like I took it serious. Like like it was no longer playtime, right? So then he goes, explain
Yeah.
to me, explain to me, why do drug dealers make the most money, at the first of the month, right? You still there?
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So then I go, it's because, people get their welfare checks, they get their, social security money, they get all this money and they spend it on crack, right? They spend it on heroin, they spend it whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's why you make the most money, at the
Yeah.
first of the month.
Yep.
And he goes, let me ask you another question, right? So now he's no longer talking to the rest of the group. He's talking to me now, right? Because
Yeah.
he knows what I'm doing. He knows what I'm involved in. And he goes, let me ask you another question. Do you like kids? And that like was out of the blue. Like, what do you mean I like kids? Like, what is this? Where's this going? Right. And he goes, I'm being serious, right? Like, I see you take care of your siblings,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, you are a responsible guy.
Yeah.
I see how you interact with little kids in the community, because I did stuff at the Boys and Girls Club and things like that, right? So he goes, so what do you think about little kids? And I go, I have no problem with little kids. I love little kids, right? Like yeah, you know me. I do take care of my siblings, and and I'm at the park playing basketball with little kids all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes, well, let's go back a little bit, right? Let's just put this in context. So if you're saying that these mothers, these fathers are spending all of their money in the first of the month, and we know that that includes all their food stamps, right? That includes the money that's supposed to go to the utility bills, to go to clothes, to go to these things. What happens to that child for a month,
Yeah. Not gonna eat,
right?
right? Yeah.
Right. So as he's saying this and he's putting in context, all I could do was imagine myself as this runaway kid, right? That was hungry, that was homeless, that was, didn't have anyone to look after me. And then I also, just imagine all these little kids that I used to see out in the middle of the streets wandering, right? Like, where are their parents, right?
Yeah.
And realize, like realizing that I am contributing to this.
Yeah.
Like I'm contributing to this misery, to their misery, right?
And you
And I'm
did that, right? I mean, you were on the streets, right?
yeah,
You were without a home. You felt that pain.
yeah. So when he did this and put it in context, man, I just started crying. I remember I was crying in front of everybody. Like, I was crying in front of him. I was crying in front of my friends. And I just didn't care anymore. I was just bawling. And then I left, and it changed me. Like I went cold turkey. Like, I didn't want to be involved in hanging out with my friends late nights, and I didn't go to the clubs anymore. I didn't sell anymore. I didn't do any of these things, and I just became really focused in school.
Wow.
Right, so it was a big turning point for me.
Thank God you have a good heart, man. You have a good heart, and you had somebody around who could touch that heart, and focus your energy on something more productive, So do you think that's like a major part of like what gave you that focus and determination to pursue education at that point? Or
it was, Nicholas Poulos was the person that helped motivate me and inspire me to pursue higher education, right?
Okay.
He allowed me to enjoy learning, right?
Mm,
Willie Dardell put me on a straight path, right?
mm.
With him was about manhood and role, being a man, understanding my role and responsibilities in society, right? Knowing that I have a responsibility, that my father lost his life to help create me, and I need to do better.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, man. We're coming in on the hour. I really want to open up to questions, but let's. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask them now. But I did want to end by encouraging everybody to go get that book and read it. I'm going to include it. It looks like Pick included that in the comments. It's called Resilience: From Killing Fields to Boardroom: The SALT Effect. If you've enjoyed, Imad's interview and, his experiences and his insights, I think they benefit everyone. People who have had a very hard life, or even people like me who think they have a hard life at times and need some perspective. I think it could benefit anyone. And Imad, you also mentioned you're supporting Vera House's White Ribbon Campaign. Do you want to talk about that a little bit before we
Yeah,
go?
so this year I'm what they call an honorary chair. Basically,
Okay.
I'm a spokesperson for the White Ribbon Campaign for Vera House. Vera House is a nonprofit organization that help to deal with domestic violence, right? They help safeguard women and children that have experienced domestic violence. They do education. They educate. They have education programs. They have counseling programs. They also have safety programs where they actually take the family and put them in shelter away from the violence. They have advocacy programs, and they also have legal services. So as a spokesperson for the White Ribbon Campaign, it's my job to bring awareness to domestic violence that is happening worldwide. And it's not just one way. It's not just men to women. It could be also women to men. And being inclusive, especially with the LGBT community, it could be men to men or women to women.
Okay, wow. So thank you for all your dedication and hard work, and sharing this knowledge with us, and working on this Vera House White Ribbon Campaign, promoting and increasing awareness. That's really great, man. I'm going to include a link for that also, so that people can support those efforts as well. And anyone, if you have questions later on, we're going to have a recording of this video, so please feel free to leave questions. And I can bring Imad in to answer anything that kind of wasn't discussed here. Imad, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. God bless. Really, thank you for your time and sharing that with us.
I appreciate it. Anytime, man.
All right, man. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.